What happens when a bully picks the wrong target? When 17-year-old Marcus Thompson decided to make his new teacher's life miserable, he thought he was facing just another pushover educator. After all, Sarah Mitchell looked like every other substitute teacher who had walked through the doors of Lincoln High School, quiet, soft-spoken, and easily intimidated. But Marcus had no idea that behind those calm brown eyes was someone who had survived the most grueling military training on Earth. Someone who had faced down armed enemies in foreign lands and lived to tell the tale. Someone whose reflexes had been honed by years of life-or-death situations that would break most people. In 30 seconds, Marcus would learn that his biggest mistake wasn't just attacking a teacher, it was attacking the wrong teacher. This is the true story of how one moment of violence revealed a hero hiding in plain sight, and how a classroom confrontation became a lesson that would change an entire school forever. Sarah Mitchell pulled her small Honda Civic into the faculty parking lot of Lincoln High School on a crisp Monday morning in October. She sat in her car for a moment, studying the sprawling brick building that would be her workplace for the next few months. At 32 years old, Sarah was starting over in a way she had never imagined when she first enlisted in the Navy 15 years earlier. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as students began arriving for another day of classes. Sarah watched them through her windshield, groups of teenagers laughing and shoving each other playfully, others walking alone with their heads down, and a few who looked like they would rather be anywhere else in the world. She understood that feeling more than they knew. Sarah gathered her simple black messenger bag and stepped out of the car. She was dressed professionally but modestly, a navy blue blazer, dark slacks, and comfortable flats. Her shoulder-length brown hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. To anyone watching, she looked like exactly what she was supposed to be, a substitute teacher filling in for Mrs. Henderson, who was recovering from surgery. What they could not see was the network of scars hidden beneath her clothing. The faded mark on her left shoulder from shrapnel in Afghanistan. The surgical scar on her abdomen from a training accident during her SEAL preparation. The small but permanent reminder on her right hand from a knife fight in Somalia that had saved 3 hostages and earned her a commendation she never talked about. Sarah had spent 12 years as one of the first female Navy SEALs, serving in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. She had parachuted into hostile territory, cleared buildings filled with armed enemies, and made split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death for her team and innocent civilians. But all of that felt like another lifetime now. The transition to civilian life had been harder than any mission she had ever undertaken. After being medically discharged following a back injury sustained during a rescue operation in Syria, Sarah found herself adrift in a world that seemed impossibly quiet and safe. The constant hypervigilance that had kept her alive in combat zones now felt like a burden in grocery stores and coffee shops. The skills that made her one of the most effective special operations soldiers in the military seemed useless when it came to figuring out health insurance or apartment leases. Teaching had not been her first choice, or even her second. Sarah had tried working for a private security company, but the corporate environment felt stifling after years of military structure and purpose. She had considered law enforcement, but something about the idea of carrying a weapon again made her stomach turn. Her therapist at the VA hospital had suggested that working with young people might give her the sense of purpose she was missing, and, after 6 months of substitute teaching in various districts, Sarah was beginning to think she might have been right. Walking through the main entrance of Lincoln High School, Sarah was greeted by the familiar chaos of a typical American high school. The hallways buzzed with the energy of over 2,000 students moving between classes, lockers slamming shut, and the distant sound of someone practicing scales on a trumpet. The smell of industrial cleaner mixed with teenage body spray and cafeteria food created an oddly comforting atmosphere that reminded Sarah why she had started to enjoy this work. The main office was a cramped space filled with filing cabinets, motivational posters, and the barely controlled chaos that seemed to define most school administrative areas. Behind the counter, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes looked up from a computer screen covered in sticky notes. "You must be Sarah Mitchell," the woman said with a warm smile. "I'm Janet Rodriguez, the main secretary. Welcome to Lincoln High. Mrs. Henderson left detailed lesson plans for you, and I have to say, you are a lifesaver for taking this assignment on such short notice." Sarah returned the smile, feeling some of the tension in her shoulders relax. "Happy to help." How long will Mrs. Henderson be out? At least 6 weeks, possibly longer. Hip replacement surgery is no joke at her age. Janet handed Sarah a folder thick with papers and a small key. Your classroom is 247, second floor. The first bell rings in about 20 minutes, so you will have time to get settled. The students are generally good kids, but I will not lie to you, some of them can be challenging. Especially in the afternoon classes. As Sarah climbed the stairs to the second floor, she reflected on what Janet had said about challenging students. During her substitute teaching assignments, she had encountered every type of difficult teenager imaginable. Kids acting out because of problems at home, students who had given up on school entirely, and the occasional bully who thought they could intimidate a substitute teacher. In every case, Sarah had found that patience, consistency, and genuine interest in their well-being was far more effective than any attempt to assert authority through force. Room 247 was a typical high school English classroom, 30 desks arranged in neat rows, inspirational quotes about reading and writing taped to the walls, and a whiteboard that had seen better days. Mrs. Henderson had left everything meticulously organized, with detailed lesson plans, seating charts, and notes about individual students who might need extra attention or different approaches. Sarah spent the next 15 minutes familiarizing herself with the layout and reviewing the class schedules. She would be teaching 5 periods of English, ranging from freshman introductory courses to senior advanced placement classes. The age and skill range would require her to adapt quickly throughout the day, but Sarah had learned to be flexible during her military service. The first bell rang, and, within minutes, students began filtering into the classroom. The freshman class was exactly what Sarah expected, a mix of nervous 14-year-olds trying to look older than they were and kids who still seemed more like middle schoolers than high schoolers. They chattered excitedly about the weekend, upcoming tests, and the usual drama that seemed to define teenage life. Good morning, everyone, Sarah said once the final bell had rung. I am Ms. Mitchell, and I will be your substitute teacher while Mrs. Henderson recovers from her surgery. I know change can be difficult, but I am here to make sure your learning continues without interruption. A boy in the third row raised his hand tentatively. Is Mrs. Henderson okay? She is like our favorite teacher. Sarah smiled at the genuine concern in his voice. She is going to be just fine. Hip replacement surgery is common, and she should be back to full strength in a few weeks. In the meantime, she has left very detailed plans to make sure you stay on track with your curriculum. The morning classes went smoothly. Sarah found that most of the students were curious about their new teacher but respectful and engaged. During her lunch break, she sat in the faculty lounge and listened to other teachers discuss their students, upcoming parent conferences, and the usual challenges of education in an underfunded district. How was your first morning? Asked Tom Bradley, a social studies teacher who had been at Lincoln for over 20 years. The kids treating you well? Very well, Sarah replied. Mrs. Henderson clearly has their respect, and that seems to transfer to substitutes. They are good kids. Tom nodded approvingly. Helen Henderson is one of the best teachers this school has ever had. The students know that, and they generally behave accordingly. Although. He paused, glancing around the faculty lounge before lowering his voice. You might want to watch yourself in the last 2 periods of the day. That is when we get some of our more challenging students. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Challenging how? Well, there are a few kids who have made substitute teachers quit before lunch, Tom explained. Marcus Thompson in particular. Kid is smart as hell, but he has anger issues and no respect for authority. He has been suspended 3 times this year already, and it is only October. Administration keeps giving him chances because his test scores are through the roof, but he has made several subs cry. What kind of things does he do? Sarah asked, genuinely curious rather than concerned. Verbal intimidation, mostly. He is big for his age, 17 years old, but looks like a college linebacker. He will argue with everything you say, try to get other students to join in disrupting class, and if he really does not like you, he has been known to get physical. Nothing too serious yet, but he shoved Mr. Peterson last month when Peterson tried to take his phone away. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. During her military service, she had dealt with plenty of people who used intimidation and aggression to mask deeper issues. Usually, it came from fear, insecurity, or past trauma. Rarely was someone truly malicious without reason. "Thanks for the heads up," she told Tom. "I appreciate you looking out for me." The afternoon classes started much the same as the morning ones. Fourth period was a sophomore English class that seemed engaged and well-behaved. Fifth period was when things began to change. As students filed into the classroom for the final period of the day, Sarah immediately noticed the shift in energy. These were upperclassmen, mostly juniors and seniors, and they carried themselves with the confidence that came from being at the top of the high school hierarchy. They were louder, more casual in their interactions, and several of them looked at Sarah with the calculating expression she had seen before, teenagers sizing up a new authority figure to see what they could get away with. About halfway through the students entering the room, Sarah saw him. Marcus Thompson was exactly as Tom Bradley had described, a 17-year-old who looked like he could play college football. At 6 feet 2 inches tall and probably weighing close to 200 pounds, Marcus dominated the space around him. His dark hair was cut short on the sides but longer on top, styled with gel. He wore a black hoodie, jeans, and expensive basketball shoes that probably cost more than Sarah made in a week as a substitute teacher. But it was not his size that caught Sarah's attention, it was his eyes. She had seen that look before, in young soldiers who had been through too much too soon, in refugees who had learned that the world was not a safe place, in her own mirror during the darkest days after her discharge from the military. Marcus Thompson was angry, but underneath that anger was pain. Marcus walked to a desk in the back corner of the room and dropped into his chair with deliberate heaviness, the metal legs scraping loudly against the floor. Several other students glanced at him and then at Sarah, as if waiting to see what would happen. "All right, everyone, let's get started," Sarah said once the final bell had rung. "I know this is your last class of the day, and you are probably tired, but we have some interesting material to cover." For the first 20 minutes of class, things went relatively smoothly. Sarah was reviewing character development in the novel they were reading, and most students seemed engaged. Marcus sat in the back, not participating but not actively disrupting either. Sarah began to think that maybe Tom Bradley had been overly cautious in his warnings. Then, Sarah made the mistake of calling on Marcus directly. "Marcus, what do you think motivates the main character's decision in Chapter 12, she asked, hoping to draw him into the discussion. Marcus looked up from his desk, where he had been carving something into the surface with a pen. His expression was a mixture of annoyance and contempt. "I think this whole book is stupid, and I think this class is a waste of time," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The room fell silent. 28 other students turned to look between Marcus and Sarah, waiting to see how their substitute teacher would respond. Sarah could feel the tension in the air. This was clearly a test, not just from Marcus, but from the entire class. Sarah had faced down armed insurgents, but somehow this moment felt just as crucial. How she handled the next few seconds would determine not just whether she could manage this class, but whether she could reach a troubled young man who was clearly crying out for help in the only way he knew how. She looked directly at Marcus, her expression calm but serious. "That is certainly one perspective, Marcus. But, since you are required to be here regardless of your opinion of the material, maybe we can find a way to make it more relevant to you. What kind of stories do you actually enjoy?" Marcus clearly had not expected that response. His expression faltered for just a moment before hardening again. "I do not enjoy stories. I think English class is for people who are not smart enough for real subjects." "Interesting," Sarah replied, maintaining her calm tone. "What would you consider a real subject?" "Math. Science. Things that matter in the real world." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You know, some of the best problem solvers I have ever known were also excellent at understanding human nature and motivation. The skills you use to analyze characters in literature, understanding why people make the choices they do, predicting how they might react in different situations, those same skills are essential in fields like psychology, business, law enforcement, and military leadership." For the first time since entering the classroom, Marcus looked genuinely interested. "Military leadership?" Absolutely. Understanding how people think and what drives them can be the difference between success and failure in high-stakes situations. Literature is just practice for reading real people. The rest of the class continued without major incident, but Sarah could see that something had shifted in Marcus's attitude. He was still resistant and clearly testing boundaries, but he was also listening. As students packed up their books and prepared to leave, Sarah made a mental note to research Marcus's background and see if she could understand what was driving his behavior. The final bell rang, and students began filing out of the classroom. Most of them seemed relieved that the day had ended without major drama. Marcus was one of the last to leave, and, as he walked past Sarah's desk, he stopped. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice lower and less aggressive than it had been during class. "Were you really in the military?" Sarah looked up at him, seeing past the intimidating exterior to the curious and hurting teenager underneath. "Yes, I was." "What branch?" "Navy." Marcus nodded slowly, as if processing this information. "My dad was Army. Did 2 tours in Iraq." "That must have been difficult for your family," Sarah said gently. Marcus's expression hardened again, and, for a moment, Sarah thought she had pushed too far. "My dad is fine," he said curtly. "He is a hero." With that, Marcus turned and walked out of the classroom, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and a growing certainty that there was much more to this young man's story than anyone at Lincoln High School understood. As Sarah gathered her things and prepared to leave for the day, she reflected on her first day at Lincoln High School. The students were indeed good kids, just as Janet Rodriguez had said. Even Marcus, despite his aggressive exterior, was clearly intelligent and capable of engaging with the material when approached the right way. But Sarah also recognized the signs she had learned to watch for during her military service, signs that someone was struggling with more than they could handle alone. Tomorrow, she decided, she would start trying to figure out how to help Marcus Thompson before his anger and pain led him down a path he could not come back from. Walking to her car in the faculty parking lot, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. For the first time since her discharge from the Navy, she felt like she might have found something worth fighting for again. She just did not know yet how much fighting it would require. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Lincoln High School 30 minutes before her first class. She had spent the previous evening researching Marcus Thompson through the school's student information system, and what she had found painted a picture that was both heartbreaking and familiar. Marcus Thompson was 17 years old, a junior with a grade point average that fluctuated wildly between semesters. His standardized test scores were in the 95th percentile, marking him as genuinely gifted, but his classroom performance told a different story. He had been suspended 6 times since starting high school, each incident involving conflicts with authority figures. His disciplinary file was thick with reports of verbal confrontations, defiant behavior, and what teachers described as an attitude problem. But it was the family information that made Sarah's chest tighten with recognition. Marcus lived with his mother, Elena Thompson, and his 8-year-old sister, Sophia. His father, Staff Sergeant David Thompson, had been killed in an IED explosion in Afghanistan 3 years earlier. The school counselor's notes mentioned that Marcus had been in therapy immediately following his father's death but had stopped attending sessions after 6 months, claiming they were useless. Sarah understood the anger that came with losing someone in military service. She had lost teammates, friends who had become family during years of shared danger and hardship. But losing a parent as a teenager, especially in such a violent and senseless way, created wounds that often festered if not properly treated. During her lunch break, Sarah sought out Marcus's guidance counselor, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Patricia Williams who had been working with troubled students for over 15 years. "Marcus Thompson," Dr. Williams said with a weary sigh when Sarah mentioned his name. "That boy is breaking my heart. He has so much potential, but he is carrying around so much rage that he can barely function in a classroom setting." "Tell me about his father," Sarah asked, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair across from Dr. Williams's desk. "David Thompson was a good man by all accounts. Career military, very devoted to his family. Marcus worshipped him, they did everything together. Fishing, camping, working on cars in the garage. When David deployed for his third tour, Marcus was 14 and already struggling with the separation. When the notification officers came to the door, Dr. Williams shook her head sadly. Elena Thompson told me that Marcus just shut down. He barely spoke for months. And the therapy? We got him connected with a counselor who specializes in military family trauma, but Marcus refused to engage. He would sit in the office for 50 minutes without saying a word, then leave. Eventually, he convinced his mother that it was making things worse, and she stopped making him go. Sarah nodded, understanding the dynamic all too well. Pride and stubbornness were traits that served soldiers well in combat but could be devastating when dealing with grief and trauma. What about at home? How is he with his mother and sister? Dr. Williams pulled out a thick file and flipped through several pages. According to his mother, he is a completely different person at home. Protective of his sister, helps around the house, maintains a part-time job to contribute to family income. But he has also taken on what she describes as an unhealthy sense of responsibility for being the man of the house. Meaning? Meaning he acts like he is Sophia's father rather than her brother. He drives her to school, helps with homework, attends parent-teacher conferences when Elena has to work. Elena Thompson is a nurse who works double shifts to keep the family afloat financially, so Marcus has essentially become a 17-year-old single parent. The picture was becoming clearer for Sarah. Marcus Thompson was not just a troubled teenager acting out for attention, he was a young man carrying an adult-sized burden while trying to process grief that he had never been allowed to properly experience. Has anyone tried to connect with him through his military background? Sarah asked. We have a few teachers who are veterans, but Marcus seems to view any attempt to discuss his father's service as either pity or an invasion of privacy. He shut down Mr. Peterson completely when Peterson mentioned his own army service. Sarah thanked Dr. Williams for her time and spent the rest of her lunch period developing a strategy. Marcus Thompson was not the enemy, he was a casualty of war, just as much as his father had been. The difference was that Marcus was still alive and still reachable, if approached correctly. The afternoon brought the same routine as the previous day, but Sarah was prepared this time. When Marcus entered her fifth period classroom, she was ready for him. The class began smoothly enough, with Sarah leading a discussion about conflict in literature. She had chosen the topic deliberately, hoping to create an opening for deeper conversation about how people dealt with difficult situations. 20 minutes into the class, Sarah saw her opportunity. Conflict in literature often mirrors conflict in real life, she said, addressing the entire class but keeping one eye on Marcus in the back corner. Characters face impossible choices, deal with loss, and struggle to find meaning when their world has been turned upside down. These are not just story problems, they are human problems. Marcus looked up from his desk, where he had been working on homework for another class. For the first time since Sarah had met him, he seemed genuinely interested in what she was saying. Can anyone think of a time in their own life when they faced a conflict that felt impossible to resolve? Sarah asked. The room was quiet for a long moment. Teenagers were notoriously reluctant to share personal information in front of their peers, especially when it involved admitting vulnerability. Then, a girl named Jennifer near the front of the room raised her hand tentatively. When my parents got divorced, I felt like I had to choose sides. But choosing either side meant hurting someone I loved. Sarah nodded approvingly. That is exactly the kind of impossible choice that characters in literature face all the time. How did you handle it? I tried to stay neutral, but that just made everyone mad at me. Eventually, I realized that I could not control what my parents did to each other, only how I responded to it. That is a very mature insight, Jennifer. Sometimes the only control we have is over our own actions and reactions. Sarah glanced at Marcus and saw that he was listening intently, though he was trying to look disinterested. She decided to push a little further. Of course, some conflicts are bigger than family disputes, she continued. Some people face loss that seems impossibly unfair, situations where there are no good choices, only degrees of bad ones. Literature helps us understand how different people cope with those kinds of challenges. Marcus's pen stopped moving across his homework paper. Sarah could see that she had struck a nerve, but she was not sure yet whether it was a good nerve or a bad one. That is easy to say when you are reading about fictional characters, Marcus said suddenly, his voice carrying an edge of challenge. Real life is not that simple. Several students turned to look at him, surprised by his sudden participation in the discussion. Sarah kept her expression neutral and encouraging. You are absolutely right, Marcus. Real life is much more complicated than fiction. But sometimes reading about how others handle difficult situations can give us new perspectives on our own challenges. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with a calculating expression. And sometimes reading about fake problems just makes real problems seem worse. Sarah recognized the test in his words. Marcus was probing, trying to see if she would retreat into safe, superficial territory or if she was willing to engage with the deeper issues he was hinting at. That is possible, Sarah agreed. But I would argue that there are no fake problems in good literature, only universal human experiences expressed through specific characters. Loss, anger, fear, love, hope, these are not fictional emotions. Some losses are bigger than others, Marcus said, his voice quieter now but still challenging. The rest of the class was silent, sensing that something important was happening but not understanding what. You are absolutely right, Sarah said simply. Some losses are so big that they change who we are forever. The question is not whether we will be changed by loss, but how we choose to let it change us. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see him wrestling with whether to trust her enough to continue the conversation. Finally, he looked down at his desk and muttered, "Easy for you to say." Actually, it is not, Sarah replied, her voice gentle but firm. I lost people too, Marcus. People who mattered more than I can explain to anyone who was not there. Marcus looked up sharply, and, for the first time, Sarah saw past his anger to the pain underneath. In that moment, he looked less like an intimidating teenager and more like the 14-year-old boy who had watched uniformed officers walk up his front steps with news that would destroy his world. The final bell rang before either of them could say anything else, and students began gathering their belongings. As Marcus packed up his things, Sarah made a decision that she hoped would not backfire. Marcus, can you stay for a minute? I would like to talk to you about something. Several students glanced back as they left the room, clearly curious about what their substitute teacher wanted with the school's most notorious troublemaker. Marcus hesitated, and, for a moment, Sarah thought he might just walk out. Finally, he slung his backpack over his shoulder and approached her desk. Am I in trouble? He asked, his defensive walls immediately back in place. No, you are not in trouble. I just wanted to talk to you about your comment earlier. About loss. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, looking toward the door as if considering escape. I do not want to talk about my feelings or whatever. I get enough of that from Dr. Williams. Sarah smiled slightly. I am not a counselor, Marcus. I am a former Navy SEAL who understands what it means to lose people who matter. Marcus's eyes widened in surprise. You were a SEAL? For 12 years. I served in Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and a few other places I am not supposed to talk about. Women cannot be SEALs, Marcus said, though his tone suggested curiosity rather than disbelief. Actually, women have been able to serve in special operations roles since 2016. I was part of the first group to complete the training program. Marcus stared at her with new interest. Did you know my dad? Staff Sergeant David Thompson? Sarah's heart clenched at the hope in his voice. I did not know him personally, but I knew men like him. Good soldiers who served with honor and left behind families who loved them. Marcus's expression hardened again. Everyone says that. He died serving his country. He died with honor. He was a hero. But he still died, and saying nice things about it does not change anything. You are right, Sarah said simply. It does not change anything. Your father is still gone, and you are still here dealing with a life that is probably nothing like what you planned. Marcus looked surprised by her directness. Most adults tried to comfort him with platitudes about his father's sacrifice and how proud he should be. Sarah could see that her honesty was both refreshing and unsettling for him. "I do not want to talk about my dad," Marcus said, but his voice lacked its usual aggressive edge. "That is fine. We do not have to talk about him. But I want you to know that if you ever do want to talk about your dad, about being angry, about feeling like you have to take care of everyone, I understand those feelings better than most people." Marcus stood silently for a long moment, clearly wrestling with conflicting emotions. Finally, he said, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because 3 years ago, I was medically discharged from the military after being injured during a rescue mission. I spent months being angry at everyone and everything, angry at the people who hurt me, angry at the military for letting me go, angry at myself for getting injured, angry at the world for not being fair. That anger was eating me alive." "What changed?" Marcus asked quietly. "I realized that being angry was not dishonoring the people I had lost or the life I had to leave behind. But letting that anger control my choices was. Your father raised you to be better than your worst moments, Marcus. Do not let grief turn you into someone he would not recognize." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes, and Sarah could see him struggling not to let them fall. 17 years old, carrying the weight of a man's responsibilities, and still afraid to let anyone see him cry. "I do not know how to not be angry," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Anger is not the problem, Marcus. Anger is just grief wearing a disguise. The problem is when we let anger make our decisions for us instead of making conscious choices about who we want to be." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and looked toward the door again. "I should go. My sister will be waiting for me to pick her up." "Of course. But, Marcus? Tomorrow, when you come to class, try to remember that you have a choice about how you show up. You can choose to be angry at the world, or you can choose to be someone your father would be proud of. Both feelings can exist at the same time." Marcus nodded slowly and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he turned back. "Ms. Mitchell? What happened to the people you lost?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "They died doing something they believed in, trying to protect people who could not protect themselves. Just like your father. Do you still miss them?" "Every day." Marcus nodded once more and walked out of the classroom, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of the conversation and the hope that she had managed to plant a seed of understanding in a young man who desperately needed to know that he was not alone. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment, reflecting on her decision to share her military background with Marcus. In general, she preferred to keep her past service private, partly because it often changed how people saw her and partly because she was still processing her own complicated feelings about her military career. But Marcus Thompson was not just any student. He was a casualty of war who did not even realize he was wounded. His anger and defiance were not character flaws, they were symptoms of trauma that had never been properly addressed. Sarah recognized herself in his pain, and, more importantly, she recognized the potential for healing. The next few days would tell her whether her instincts were correct. Either Marcus would respond to her honesty and begin to open up, or he would retreat further into his anger and resentment. Either way, Sarah was committed to helping him find a better path forward. As she prepared for sleep that night, Sarah allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found a way to turn her military training into something that could save a life in a completely different way than she had ever imagined. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah watched Marcus Thompson with the patience and attention to detail that had served her well during reconnaissance missions. What she observed was a young man at war with himself, caught between the child who had lost his father and the adult responsibilities he had taken on too soon. Some days, Marcus participated in class discussions with insight that surprised even Sarah. He had clearly inherited his father's intelligence and had read far more widely than most of his peers. When discussing themes of loyalty and sacrifice in literature, Marcus offered perspectives that showed a mature understanding of complex moral issues. Other students began to look to him during debates, recognizing that beneath his aggressive exterior was someone who thought deeply about important questions. But, on other days, Marcus arrived at school like a storm cloud ready to break. Sarah learned to read the signs, the set of his shoulders as he entered the classroom, the way he held his jaw when something had gone wrong at home or in another class. On those days, Sarah gave him space while keeping him engaged, asking questions that allowed him to channel his intensity into academic discussion rather than confrontation. The breakthrough came during a lesson on character motivation in Shakespeare's Hamlet. Sarah had chosen the play deliberately, knowing that the themes of loss, revenge, and the burden of living up to a dead father's legacy would resonate with Marcus's situation. Hamlet struggles with what it means to honor his father's memory, Sarah explained to the class. He feels pressure to take action, but he is not sure what the right action is. Sometimes the desire to do something, anything, can lead us to make choices that hurt ourselves and the people we care about. Marcus looked up from his desk, where he had been sketching geometric patterns in the margins of his notebook. Maybe Hamlet's problem is that everyone expects him to be his father instead of letting him be himself. The observation was perceptive and clearly came from personal experience. Sarah seized the opportunity to dig deeper. That is an excellent point, Marcus. How do you think someone deals with that kind of pressure? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see other students waiting for his response. Over the past 2 weeks, Marcus had gained a grudging respect from his classmates, who had begun to see him as more than just the angry kid in the back of the room. I think, Marcus said slowly, that maybe Hamlet needed to figure out who he was before he could decide what he should do. You cannot honor someone else if you do not know who you are. The insight was profound, and Sarah felt a surge of hope that Marcus was beginning to process his grief in a healthier way. After class, he lingered as had become his habit, and they talked briefly about the play and its relevance to modern life. These conversations had become the highlight of Sarah's day, glimpses of the remarkable young man that Marcus could become if he could work through his pain. But progress was rarely linear, especially when dealing with trauma. The explosion came on a Thursday afternoon in late October, triggered by an incident that Sarah would later realize had been building for weeks. Marcus arrived at fifth period with the telltale signs of a bad day written across his face. His jaw was clenched tight, his hands were balled into fists, and he slammed his books down on his desk with enough force to make several students jump. Sarah made a mental note to approach him carefully and began class with a review of homework assignments. 20 minutes in, she noticed that Marcus had not turned in his essay on character development, which was unusual since he had been consistently completing his work. Marcus, do you have your essay to turn in? She asked quietly, hoping not to embarrass him in front of the class. Marcus looked up at her with eyes that blazed with anger. I do not have it. That is fine. Can you get it to me tomorrow? I said I do not have it. His voice was louder now, drawing the attention of other students. Sarah recognized the warning signs. Marcus was looking for a fight, and she was the available target. In her military experience, the best way to defuse this kind of situation was to avoid escalation while maintaining clear boundaries. Marcus, why do not you and I talk about this after class? For now, let's continue with our discussion of no. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I am tired of you pretending to understand me. I am tired of everyone in this school treating me like I am some kind of charity case. The room fell silent. Sarah could feel the tension radiating from Marcus, the barely controlled rage that seemed ready to explode. She had seen this before in soldiers suffering from PTSD, the moment when accumulated stress and trauma reached a breaking point. Marcus, I need you to sit down and lower your voice, Sarah said calmly but firmly. You need me to sit down? Marcus took a step toward her desk, his size suddenly seeming much more intimidating in the confines of the classroom. You do not get to tell me what I need to do. You are not my mother, and you sure as hell are not my father. Several students gasped, and Sarah could see genuine fear in some of their eyes. Marcus was a big kid, and his anger was palpable. But Sarah had faced down armed insurgents and trained killers. An angry teenager, even a large one, did not frighten her. You are right, Sarah said, her voice remaining calm and steady. I am not your parent. But I am your teacher, and I am responsible for everyone's safety in this classroom. I need you to sit down. Marcus laughed bitterly. Safety? You want to talk about safety? Where was safety when my dad got blown up by some coward with a bomb? Where was safety when we got that phone call that destroyed my family? He was escalating rapidly, and Sarah could see that he was past the point of rational discussion. The pain and anger that he had been carrying for 3 years was finally erupting, and, unfortunately, she was in the blast radius. Marcus, I understand that you are in pain, but you understand? Marcus stepped closer to her desk, his hands clenched into fists. You do not understand anything. You sit there in your comfortable civilian life, pretending to know what it is like to lose someone who actually mattered. The accusation hit Sarah harder than she expected. In his anger and pain, Marcus was striking out at the one person who had tried to reach him, using her attempts to help as weapons against her. I think you need to take a break, Sarah said, her voice still calm but with an edge of steel that had not been there before. Go to the office and cool down. We can talk about this later when you are ready. I am not going anywhere, Marcus said, his voice rising to a shout. I am tired of everyone telling me what to do. I am tired of everyone expecting me to just get over it and move on. I am tired of people like you pretending to care when you have no idea what real loss feels like. He was inches from her desk now, leaning over it in a posture that would have been intimidating to most people. Sarah remained seated, her hands relaxed on her desk, her expression calm but watchful. Marcus, you need to step back and lower your voice. This conversation is over for now. The hell it is, Marcus snarled. You do not get to dismiss me like everyone else does. You do not get to pretend you are helping when all you are doing is stirring up things that should be left alone. In her peripheral vision, Sarah could see that some students had pulled out their phones, probably texting friends or recording what was happening. She needed to de-escalate the situation quickly before it spiraled completely out of control. Marcus, I hear that you are angry, and I understand why. But threatening your teacher is not going to solve any of your problems. It is only going to create new ones. I am not threatening you, Marcus said, though his posture and tone suggested otherwise. I am telling you to stop pretending you know me. Sarah stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. Even standing, she had to look up to meet Marcus's eyes, but her presence seemed to fill the space between them. You are right, she said quietly. I do not know everything about your situation. But I know what loss feels like, and I know what it is like to be so angry that you want to hurt someone just to make the pain stop. Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting her to agree with him. For a moment, his aggressive posture wavered. But here is what I also know, Sarah continued. Your father did not serve 3 tours in Afghanistan so that his son could grow up to intimidate teachers and classmates. He served because he believed in protecting people who could not protect themselves. Right now, you are not protecting anyone. You are just hurting people because you hurt. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His face crumpled for just a moment, and Sarah could see the grief and guilt beneath his anger. But then, the rage returned, stronger than before. Do not you dare talk about my father, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You do not know anything about why he served or what he believed in. You are right again, Sarah said, not backing down despite the menace in his voice. I did not know your father. But I know his son, and I know that the young man standing in front of me is better than this moment. Marcus stared at her for several long seconds, his breathing heavy and his hands still clenched into fists. Sarah could see him wrestling with emotions that were too big for him to handle, pain that had been festering for years without proper treatment. And then, something in Marcus snapped. You do not know me at all, he screamed, and, before anyone could react, he grabbed Sarah's coffee mug from her desk and hurled it against the classroom wall, where it shattered into pieces. The sound of breaking ceramic seemed to shock everyone in the room into silence, including Marcus himself. For a moment, he stood frozen, staring at the mess he had created as if he could not believe what he had just done. Sarah remained perfectly still, her training kicking in as she assessed the situation. Marcus was clearly having some kind of breakdown, but he had not actually threatened her physically. The thrown mug was an act of frustration rather than directed violence, though the distinction would probably be lost on school administrators. Marcus, she said softly, I need you to take a deep breath and step back from my desk. Marcus looked at her with wild eyes, as if seeing her for the first time. The anger was still there, but it was mixed with confusion and something that looked almost like fear. He started, then stopped, shaking his head as if trying to clear it. "It is okay," Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. "You are okay. But you need to step back and give yourself some space to calm down." Marcus took a step backward, then another, until he was standing in the middle of the classroom. Around him, 28 other students sat frozen in their seats, unsure whether they should run, hide, or call for help. Sarah could hear footsteps in the hallway outside, probably teachers or administrators responding to reports of shouting from her classroom. She had maybe 30 seconds before this situation moved completely out of her control. "Marcus," she said, her voice still calm and steady, "in about 10 seconds, other adults are going to come through that door. When they do, they are going to see a broken mug, a scared classroom full of students, and a young man who looks like he is out of control. How that story ends depends on what you do right now." Marcus blinked rapidly, and Sarah could see him trying to process her words through the haze of his emotional breakdown. "I want you to walk over to that corner, sit down in the chair, put your hands in your lap, and take slow, deep breaths. Can you do that for me?" For a moment, Sarah thought he might refuse or escalate further. Then, like a deflating balloon, Marcus seemed to collapse in on himself. He walked unsteadily to the corner of the room, sat down in the chair Sarah had indicated, and put his head in his hands. Just as Sarah had predicted, the classroom door burst open and Mr. Bradley, the social studies teacher, rushed in with the school security guard close behind. "What is going on here?" Mr. Bradley demanded, looking around the classroom and taking in the broken mug, the frightened students, and Marcus sitting in the corner. Sarah stepped forward, positioning herself between the administrators and Marcus. "Everything is under control now," she said calmly. Marcus had an emotional outburst, but he is calming down. "I think the best thing would be to clear the other students out quietly and then talk about what happened." The security guard, a former police officer named Mike Patterson, looked skeptical. "Ms. Mitchell, are you injured? Did the student threaten or assault you?" Sarah glanced back at Marcus, who was still sitting with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. She could see that he was crying now, finally, allowing himself to feel the full weight of his grief and fear. "No," she said firmly. "Marcus is a student in crisis, not a threat. He needs help, not punishment." Mr. Patterson frowned. "Ma'am, we have protocols for this kind of situation. The student will need to be removed from the classroom and suspended pending an investigation." "I understand your protocols," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the authority that had served her well in military command situations. "But I am telling you that this student does not need to be arrested or suspended. He needs support." Mr. Bradley looked uncertain, clearly torn between school policy and the calm confidence in Sarah's voice. "Ms. Mitchell, what exactly happened here?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would shape Marcus Thompson's immediate future. She could follow protocol, file a report that would result in Marcus being suspended or even expelled, protecting herself from any potential liability. Or she could trust her instincts about what this troubled young man really needed. The choice was easy. Marcus and I had a discussion about character motivation in literature that became emotional for him. He threw my coffee mug against the wall in frustration, immediately realized his mistake, and is now dealing with the aftermath of his behavior. I believe this is a teaching moment, not a disciplinary matter." Mr. Patterson looked skeptical. "Students do not just throw things for no reason, Ms. Mitchell. What were you discussing that set him off?" Sarah glanced back at Marcus again, who had looked up from his hands and was watching the conversation with fearful eyes. She could see him waiting to hear whether she would betray his trust or protect his privacy. "We were discussing how young people deal with loss and responsibility," she said carefully. "It is a topic that resonates personally for Marcus, and sometimes personal topics can trigger strong emotional responses." Mr. Bradley nodded slowly, his expression showing understanding. As a teacher with 20 years of experience, he had seen plenty of students struggle with personal issues that affected their academic performance. "What do you recommend we do?" he asked Sarah. Sarah looked directly at Marcus, making sure he could see the conviction in her eyes. I recommend that Marcus and I continue our conversation privately after the other students are dismissed. I think he and I can work through what happened here and develop a plan to prevent similar incidents in the future. Mr. Patterson still looked doubtful. Ms. Mitchell, with all due respect, you are a substitute teacher. This kind of behavioral intervention should be handled by trained counselors or administrators. You are absolutely right, Sarah agreed. And Marcus should definitely follow up with Dr. Williams. But right now, he needs to know that one adult in this building believes he is worth fighting for, rather than just another problem to be solved through suspension and punishment. The room was quiet for several long moments as the adults considered their options. Finally, Mr. Bradley made the decision. All right, Ms. Mitchell. We will try it your way for now. But I want a full written report of this incident on my desk first thing tomorrow morning, and Marcus will need to meet with Dr. Williams before returning to regular classes. Sarah nodded her agreement. That is completely fair. Mr. Bradley turned to address the students, who had been watching the adult conversation with fascination. Everyone gather your belongings quietly and proceed to the main office. You will be dismissed from there once we have spoken with your parents about what happened today. As the students filed out of the classroom, several of them glanced back at Marcus with expressions of concern rather than fear. Sarah realized that many of them had probably witnessed similar struggles in their own families or communities. Marcus Thompson was not a monster, he was a wounded teenager who had finally reached his breaking point. Once the students were gone and Mr. Bradley and Mr. Patterson had left, Sarah found herself alone in the classroom with Marcus, who was still sitting in the corner chair with his head down. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of Marcus's occasional sniffles as he tried to regain his composure. Sarah gave him time, understanding that he needed to process what had just happened before they could move forward. Finally, Marcus looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice hoarse from shouting and crying. Sarah moved slowly across the classroom and sat down in a student desk near him, making sure she was not looming over him or invading his space. "Do what?" she asked gently. "Why did you not get me in trouble? I threw your mug. I yelled at you. I acted like..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "You acted like someone in pain," Sarah said simply. "And people in pain deserve help, not punishment." Marcus shook his head, new tears starting to fall. "I do not deserve help. I have been such a jerk to everyone. To you, to my teachers, to my mom. I cannot even take care of my sister the way I am supposed to." Sarah felt her heart break a little at the self-loathing in his voice. "Marcus, you are 17 years old. You are not supposed to be taking care of anyone but yourself. The fact that you have been trying to take care of your sister and support your mother shows how strong you are, not how weak you are." "My dad would be so disappointed in me," Marcus whispered. "He always said that Thompsons do not give up, and look at me. I am falling apart." "Your father would not be disappointed in you for grieving," Sarah said firmly. "He would be disappointed if you gave up on yourself completely, but that is not what you are doing. You are here, trying to finish school despite everything you have been through. You are working a job to help your family. You are taking care of your sister. You are not falling apart, Marcus. You are holding together under circumstances that would break most people." Marcus looked at her skeptically. "Then, why do I feel like everything is wrong all the time?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Because you have been trying to be strong in a way that does not allow for normal human emotions like grief, fear, and anger. You have been trying to be a man instead of letting yourself be a teenager who lost his father. There is a difference." "How do you know so much about this?" Marcus asked. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would either deepen the trust between them or destroy it completely. "Because when I was discharged from the military, I tried to handle my grief and anger the same way you are handling yours. I tried to be strong all the time, never let anyone see me struggle, never ask for help. And it nearly destroyed me." Marcus studied her face intently. "What changed?" I realized that the people I lost in combat did not die so that I could spend the rest of my life being miserable. They died believing in something bigger than themselves, the idea that protecting others was worth personal sacrifice. If I wasted the life they helped save, I would be dishonoring their memory more than if I cried every day for the rest of my life. But what if I do not know how to not be angry? Marcus asked. What if the anger is the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart? Sarah smiled sadly. Then, you learn how to be angry in ways that help instead of hurt. You use that anger to motivate yourself to succeed, to protect people who need protecting, to fight for things that matter. But, you do not use it to hurt people who are trying to help you. Marcus was quiet for a long time, processing her words. Finally, he said, I am sorry about your mug. And, for yelling at you. You have been the only teacher who actually seemed to care about me as a person instead of just a problem to solve. Apology accepted, Sarah said without hesitation. And, Marcus? You are not a problem to solve. You are a young man with enormous potential who has been through trauma that would challenge anyone. There is a huge difference. They sat together in the quiet classroom as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, two people who had found their way to understanding through shared experience of loss and the long journey of healing. Sarah knew that this was just the beginning of Marcus's recovery, but, for the first time since she had met him, she believed that he was going to make it through to the other side of his grief. What she did not know was that their biggest test was still to come. The weeks following Marcus's breakdown in Sarah's classroom brought a gradual but noticeable change in his behavior. He began meeting with Dr. Williams twice a week, though Sarah suspected most of the real progress was happening in their after-class conversations. Marcus had started staying after fifth period regularly, initially to clean up the mess he had made but eventually just to talk. These conversations ranged from literature and military history to more personal topics about grief, responsibility, and what it meant to honor his father's memory. Sarah found herself looking forward to these sessions almost as much as Marcus seemed to. For the first time since her discharge, she felt like her military experience was being put to meaningful use. Marcus's grades improved dramatically. He began turning in assignments regularly and participating in class discussions with insight that impressed other students and teachers. More importantly, he seemed to be finding healthier ways to process his anger and frustration. Instead of lashing out at authority figures, he channeled his energy into academic excellence and helping other students who were struggling. Sarah began to believe that they had turned a corner. Marcus still carried his grief, that would probably never completely disappear, but he was learning to live with it rather than be controlled by it. The angry, intimidating teenager who had entered her classroom 2 months earlier was becoming a thoughtful young man who other students looked up to for guidance and support. Which made what happened on a cold Tuesday morning in November all the more devastating. Sarah arrived at school to find the parking lot buzzing with unusual activity. Police cars lined the street outside Lincoln High School, and she could see administrators huddled in serious conversations near the main entrance. Her first thought was that there had been some kind of accident or emergency, but the grim expressions on everyone's faces suggested something more serious. Janet Rodriguez met Sarah at the main office with a troubled expression. Sarah, thank goodness you are here. We have had a situation develop overnight that involves Marcus Thompson. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What kind of situation? Marcus was arrested last night after an altercation at a convenience store near his house. According to the police report, he assaulted another customer who was arguing with the store clerk. The other person ended up in the emergency room with a broken nose and possible concussion. Sarah stared at Janet in disbelief. The Marcus she had been working with for the past 2 months was capable of anger, but not unprovoked violence against strangers. What exactly happened? She asked. Janet pulled out a folder with police reports and witness statements. According to the store's security footage, Marcus was purchasing some items when another customer began arguing loudly with the young clerk about the price of cigarettes. The customer was apparently intoxicated and became increasingly aggressive, eventually grabbing the clerk by the shirt and threatening him. Sarah felt a sinking sensation as she began to understand what had probably happened. Marcus intervened to protect the clerk, Janet continued. But, according to witnesses, he used far more force than was necessary. He did not just stop the man from hurting the clerk, he put him on the ground and kept hitting him even after the threat was neutralized. Sarah closed her eyes, picturing the scene. Marcus seeing someone in a position of authority being threatened by an aggressive man, his protective instincts kicking in, his barely controlled anger finally finding what seemed like a justifiable target. "Where is Marcus now?" she asked. "He was released to his mother's custody early this morning, but he is suspended from school pending the outcome of the criminal charges. The other man is pressing charges for assault, and the district attorney's office is considering whether to file additional charges." Sarah felt a familiar weight settle in her chest, the feeling she used to get when a mission was going wrong and she could see disaster approaching but was powerless to prevent it. "Can I speak with him? Is his mother here?" "Elena Thompson is meeting with Principal Morrison right now. Marcus is not allowed on school property while the investigation is ongoing, but I think his mother would appreciate hearing from you. From what Dr. Williams has told us, you have been working closely with Marcus on his behavioral issues." Sarah nodded, though she wondered if her work with Marcus had actually contributed to what happened. Had she given him tools for managing his anger, or had she simply given him justification for seeing himself as a protector who could use violence when he deemed it necessary? 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself sitting across from Elena Thompson in Principal Morrison's office. Elena was a small woman in her 40s who looked like she had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders for years. Her nurse's uniform suggested she had come directly from her night shift at the hospital, and her eyes were red from crying. "Ms. Mitchell," Elena said when introductions were made, "Marcus talks about you all the time. He says you are the first teacher who has really understood him since his father died." Sarah felt a stab of guilt at the gratitude in Elena's voice. "Mrs. Thompson, I am so sorry about what happened last night. How is Marcus doing?" Elena's composure cracked slightly. "He keeps saying he did not do anything wrong, that he was just protecting someone who could not protect himself. He says that is what his father would have done, and I know he believes that." "But, Sarah." Elena used her first name unconsciously, as if they were old friends united by their concern for Marcus. "I watched the security footage with the police this morning. What Marcus did went far beyond protecting that clerk." Principal Morrison, a heavy-set man in his 50s who had been running Lincoln High for over a decade, leaned forward in his chair. "Ms. Mitchell, I know you have been working with Marcus on anger management and behavioral issues. In your professional opinion, what do you think triggered this incident?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. Marcus has been making significant progress in processing his grief and finding healthier outlets for his emotions. But he still struggles with what he sees as his responsibility to protect others, especially people in positions of authority who remind him of himself or his family. "Meaning?" Elena asked. "Meaning that when Marcus saw an aggressive man threatening a young store clerk, he probably saw his father's values in action, the idea that strong people have a responsibility to protect those who cannot protect themselves. But Marcus has not yet learned the difference between protection and revenge." Elena nodded slowly. The police said that the other man reminded several witnesses of Marcus's father, similar height and build, military haircut. "Do you think that could have been a factor?" Sarah felt another piece of the puzzle fall into place. Marcus had not just been protecting the clerk, he had been symbolically protecting his father's memory, fighting the kind of person who had killed his dad in some cosmic sense. "It is possible," she said carefully. "Marcus is still processing a lot of complicated emotions about his father's death and his own role in protecting his family. Sometimes those emotions can get transferred onto situations that seem similar but are actually quite different." Principal Morrison sighed heavily. "The question now is what we can do to help Marcus before this situation destroys his future completely. He is a good kid who has made a serious mistake, but if he is charged with felony assault, his chances of getting into college or finding decent employment are going to be severely limited." Elena Thompson looked at Sarah with desperate hope. "Dr. Williams said that you have military experience. Is there anything, any program or intervention, that might help Marcus learn to control his reactions better?" Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Elena Thompson was looking at her like she might be the key to saving her son's future, and Sarah was not sure she was qualified for that kind of pressure. Mrs. Thompson, there are programs designed to help veterans and military families deal with trauma and anger management issues. Some of them might be applicable to Marcus's situation, even though he is not a veteran himself. Would you be willing to help us find something like that? Elena asked. I know you do not owe us anything, but Marcus trusts you in a way he has not trusted any adult since his father died. Before Sarah could answer, there was a knock on the office door. Janet Rodriguez entered with an apologetic expression. I am sorry to interrupt, but we have another situation developing. Marcus Thompson is in the parking lot, and he is asking to speak with Ms. Mitchell. Principal Morrison frowned. Marcus is not supposed to be on school property. I know, sir, but he says he is not leaving until he talks to her. He seems very agitated. Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. An agitated Marcus Thompson who was already facing criminal charges was not someone she wanted to encounter in a public setting. I will go talk to him, she said, standing up from her chair. Ms. Mitchell, I do not think that is wise, Principal Morrison said. Given what happened last night, maybe we should call the police and have them handle this. No, Elena said quickly. Please. If Marcus is asking for Sarah, it is because he trusts her. Calling the police will just make everything worse. Sarah looked between Elena and Principal Morrison, weighing her options. The safe choice would be to stay in the office and let the administrators handle the situation. But Marcus was clearly in crisis, and Sarah had seen what happened when his emotions reached a breaking point without proper support. I will go talk to him, she said firmly. But I want school security nearby, and if the situation escalates, I want them to call for professional help immediately. Principal Morrison nodded reluctantly. Be very careful, Ms. Mitchell. I do not want anyone else getting hurt. Sarah walked through the hallways of Lincoln High School with a sense of dread building in her chest. She had no idea what state of mind Marcus would be in or what he wanted from her. The young man who had been making such positive progress over the past few months had just committed a serious act of violence, and she was not sure which version of Marcus she would encounter in the parking lot. She found him standing next to his mother's car, still wearing the same clothes he had been arrested in the night before. His knuckles were scraped and bandaged, and there was a cut above his left eyebrow that suggested the fight had been more brutal than the initial reports had indicated. But it was his expression that worried Sarah the most. Marcus looked lost in a way she had not seen since their first confrontation in her classroom. The progress they had made, the trust they had built, the young man who had been emerging from behind his anger, all of it seemed to have disappeared overnight. Marcus, she said as she approached him slowly, keeping her hands visible and her posture non-threatening. Your mom is worried about you. How are you doing? Marcus looked at her with eyes that were both desperate and defiant. Everyone is acting like I did something terrible, but I did not. I protected someone who needed protecting. Is not that what you taught me? Is not that what my dad would have wanted me to do? Sarah could hear the pain behind his words, the confusion of a young man who thought he had been doing the right thing and could not understand why everyone was treating him like a criminal. Marcus, protecting people is important. But there are different ways to protect them, and some ways can end up hurting everyone involved, including the person you are trying to help. That guy was going to hurt that kid, Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. He was drunk and angry and grabbing him. Was I supposed to just stand there and watch? No, Sarah said carefully. You were right to intervene. But once you stopped the immediate threat, you should have stopped using force. Continuing to hit someone who is no longer a danger is not protection, it is revenge. Marcus stared at her as if she had betrayed him. You do not understand what happened. You were not there. You are right, I was not there. But I saw the security footage, Marcus. I know that you stopped the man from hurting the clerk within the first few seconds. Everything that happened after that was you being angry about your father, not protecting that young man. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His face crumpled with pain and rage, and, for a moment, Sarah thought he might break down completely. Instead, his expression hardened into something she had not seen before, cold fury mixed with betrayal. "So you are like everyone else," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "You pretended to understand me, pretended to care about me, just so you could use it against me when I finally needed someone to believe in me." "Marcus, that is not—" "No," he cut her off, taking a step toward her that made Sarah's combat instincts activate for the first time since she had known him. "You told me that my father died protecting people. You told me that was something to be proud of. And, when I try to do the same thing, you side with everyone else." Sarah could see that Marcus was spiraling into a dangerous place emotionally. The trust and progress they had built over months was crumbling in real time, and she was not sure how to stop it. "Marcus, I still believe in you. But I also believe you made a mistake last night, and mistakes have consequences. That does not mean you are a bad person, and it does not mean your father would not be proud of you. It just means you need to learn from what happened and make better choices going forward." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Better choices. Right. Like the choice to trust you." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus stepped closer to her, close enough that she could see the pain and fury warring in his eyes. She realized that other people in the parking lot were watching them, probably wondering if they should intervene. "You know what I think?" Marcus said, his voice low and threatening. "I think you have been lying to me this whole time. I think you never served in combat, and you never lost anyone who mattered, and you just used my dad's death to make me trust you." The accusation was so unfair and so painful that Sarah felt her own anger flare for the first time since she had met Marcus. After everything she had shared with him, everything she had risked to help him, he was questioning the very experiences that had allowed her to understand his pain. "Marcus, you know that is not true," she said, her voice still controlled but with an edge that had not been there before. "Do I?" Marcus stepped even closer, using his size to intimidate her the way he had with other teachers. "Prove it. Tell me the names of the people you lost. Tell me how they died. Tell me something that proves you are not just another teacher pretending to care." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. Marcus was pushing her toward a line she had sworn never to cross again, the details of classified missions, the faces of teammates who had died under her command, the specifics of losses that still woke her up in night sweats. "Marcus, you know I cannot discuss classified operations. But you also know that everything I have told you about loss and grief and finding purpose after trauma is true." "That is convenient," Marcus sneered. "Hide behind classification when someone asks for proof." He was close enough now that Sarah could feel his breath on her face. In her peripheral vision, she could see school security approaching, probably responding to reports of the confrontation. "Marcus, you need to step back right now," she said, her voice carrying the authority she had used to command troops in combat situations. "Or what?" Marcus challenged. "What are you going to do if I do not? Call the police like everyone else? Have me arrested again for standing too close to someone?" Sarah could see that Marcus was past the point of rational conversation. The pain of his arrest, the shame of disappointing his mother, and the betrayal he felt from her honest assessment of his actions had combined into a toxic mixture that was looking for an outlet. "I am not going to call the police, Marcus. But you need to decide right now whether you want to make this situation worse or if you want to find a way to make it better." "You want to make it better?" Marcus's voice rose to a shout that could be heard across the parking lot. "Then, tell everyone that I was right. Tell them that I protected someone who needed protecting, just like my father would have done." "I cannot do that, Marcus, because it is not true. You started out protecting someone, but you finished by hurting someone. There is a difference, and pretending otherwise is not going to help you." The words seemed to break something inside Marcus. The last vestiges of the trust and connection they had built over the past months crumbled, replaced by the raw fury of a young man who felt utterly alone and betrayed by the one person he thought understood him. "You know what?" Marcus said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Everyone was right about you. You are just another teacher who does not care about anything except covering your own ass. You never understood me, and you never cared about helping me. You just wanted to feel good about yourself. Sarah felt each word like a knife to the chest, partly because they were so unfair and partly because she wondered if there was a grain of truth in them. Had she been trying to help Marcus for his sake, or because helping him made her feel useful and important? Marcus, I have cared about you from the first day I met you. Everything I have done has been because I believe you are capable of becoming an extraordinary man. But extraordinary men take responsibility for their actions, even when those actions come from good intentions. Extraordinary men, Marcus repeated mockingly. Like my father, right? The extraordinary man who got himself killed and left his family to fall apart without him. The pain in his voice was so raw that Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. This was what Marcus had been carrying all along, not just grief for his father's death, but anger at his father for leaving, guilt about that anger, and shame about not being able to fill the impossible void left behind. Your father was extraordinary, Marcus. And so are you. But, right now, you are letting your pain turn you into someone he would not recognize. Marcus's face twisted with anguish and rage. Do not tell me what my father would think. You did not know him. No, I did not know him personally. But, I know what kind of man raises a son who would risk his own safety to protect a stranger. I know what kind of values he must have taught you. And, I know that those values do not include beating someone unconscious after they are no longer a threat. The school security guards were close enough now that Sarah could see them clearly in her peripheral vision. She knew they were probably radioing for police backup, which meant this situation was about to escalate beyond anything she could control. Marcus, she said urgently, you have about 30 seconds before this parking lot fills up with police officers. Right now, you are just a student who is upset about being suspended. But, if you do not calm down and step away from me, you are going to be a student facing additional charges for threatening a teacher. Marcus looked around and seemed to notice the security guards for the first time. The reality of his situation, suspended from school, facing criminal charges, now having a public confrontation with the one teacher who had tried to help him, seemed to hit him all at once. His shoulders sagged, and the fight went out of him as suddenly as it had appeared. I thought you understood, he said quietly, his voice broken. I thought you were different. I do understand, Marcus. I understand that you are in more pain than any 17-year-old should have to carry. I understand that you feel responsible for protecting everyone around you because you could not protect your father. And I understand that last night, you saw a chance to be the hero your father was, and you took it. Marcus looked at her with desperate hope, as if maybe she was going to tell him that everything would be okay after all. But, I also understand, Sarah continued gently, that being a hero is not about using violence to solve problems. It is about knowing when to use force and when to use restraint. Your father knew that difference. That is what made him a good soldier and a good man. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see him wrestling with her words. Finally, he said, what am I supposed to do now? Everyone thinks I am a violent thug. My mom is scared of me. I might go to jail. Everything I worked for is gone. Sarah felt her heart break at the despair in his voice. You are supposed to take responsibility for what you did wrong, learn from it, and then prove to everyone, including yourself, that you are better than your worst moment. How? Marcus asked, and, for the first time since he had approached her in the parking lot, he sounded like the confused, hurting teenager he really was rather than the angry young man he had been pretending to be. You start by apologizing to the man you hurt, even if he was wrong to threaten the clerk. You work with a counselor to learn better ways to handle situations like that in the future. You accept whatever consequences come from your actions without blaming everyone else for not understanding you. And, you prove that this was a mistake, not a pattern. Marcus nodded slowly, tears starting to fall despite his efforts to hold them back. Will you help me? He asked quietly. Sarah felt the weight of his question. After everything that had just happened, his accusations, his attempt to intimidate her, his public breakdown, he was still asking for her help. It would have been easy to walk away, to refer him to professional counselors and wash her hands of the whole situation. But, as she looked at Marcus Thompson, standing in a school parking lot with his future hanging by a thread, Sarah saw herself 3 years earlier, angry, lost, lashing out at the people trying to help her because the pain was too big to handle alone. "Yes," she said simply. "I will help you. But, this time, you have to trust me even when I tell you things you do not want to hear. And, you have to be willing to do the hard work of changing, not just talking about it." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and nodded. "Okay. I can do that." The security guards reached them just as Marcus was stepping back and raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. Sarah quickly explained that the situation was resolved and that Marcus was leaving voluntarily to meet with his mother and the school administration. As Marcus walked toward the school building to face the consequences of his actions, Sarah stood in the parking lot feeling emotionally exhausted but cautiously hopeful. The young man who had just threatened her was the same young man who had asked for her help, and she believed that the second version was the real Marcus Thompson. But, as she watched him disappear into the school building, Sarah could not shake the feeling that their biggest test was still ahead of them. Marcus had taken the first step toward taking responsibility for his actions, but the road to redemption was long and difficult, and there would be more moments of crisis before he found his way to the other side. What Sarah did not know was that the most dangerous moment of all was still to come, and, when it arrived, all of her military training would finally be put to the ultimate test. The 2 weeks following Marcus's arrest and suspension were some of the most challenging in Sarah's teaching career. Marcus was attending counseling sessions 3 times a week and meeting with a lawyer to negotiate a plea agreement that would avoid jail time in exchange for community service and anger management classes. Sarah visited him twice during his suspension, helping him keep up with his schoolwork and continue the emotional work they had been doing together. The progress was slow but real. Marcus was beginning to understand the difference between protective instincts and vengeful actions. He was learning to recognize the warning signs that preceded his emotional outbursts and developing healthier ways to process his anger and grief. Most importantly, he was starting to separate his identity from his role as his family's protector, allowing himself to be a teenager dealing with loss rather than a substitute parent carrying impossible responsibilities. The plea agreement was finalized on a Thursday, and Marcus was scheduled to return to school the following Monday. Sarah was cautiously optimistic about his prospects. The legal consequences were serious but manageable, and Marcus seemed genuinely committed to changing his behavior patterns. Which made what happened on Friday afternoon all the more shocking. Sarah was staying late to prepare lesson plans for the following week when she heard raised voices coming from the main hallway. It was nearly 5 p.m., and the building was mostly empty except for a few teachers and custodial staff. The voices were getting louder, and Sarah recognized the tone of an argument escalating toward violence. She stepped out of her classroom and saw a scene that made her blood run cold. Marcus Thompson was in the hallway, along with a man in his 30s who was clearly intoxicated and extremely agitated. The man was tall and heavyset, wearing work clothes that suggested he had come straight from a construction site or similar job. But it was not just the presence of an angry drunk that alarmed Sarah, it was the way Marcus was positioned defensively in front of the main office, his body language suggesting that he was protecting something or someone behind him. Sarah moved closer and realized that Dr. Williams was in the office, along with a young woman who looked like she might be a college student or recent graduate. The drunk man was shouting at them through the glass door, his words slurred but his intent clearly threatening. "You have no right to keep my daughter away from me," the man was yelling. "She is 18 years old, and she can see whoever she wants to see." Sarah quickly pieced together what was happening. The young woman was probably the man's daughter, and she had come to the school to speak with Dr. Williams, perhaps about resources for dealing with an abusive family situation. The father had followed her and was now demanding access to her while clearly under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Marcus was positioned between the man and the office door, his hands raised in a placating gesture but his stance suggesting he was ready for a physical confrontation. "Sir, you need to calm down," Marcus was saying, his voice steady but firm. "The school is closed, and you need to leave the building." Sarah felt a surge of pride at Marcus's restraint. He was de-escalating rather than escalating, trying to resolve the situation without violence. This was exactly the kind of progress she had been hoping to see. But the man was not interested in peaceful resolution. "Get out of my way, hey kid, before I move you myself," he snarled, taking a step toward Marcus. Sarah could see Marcus's jaw tighten, and she recognized the warning signs of his temper starting to rise. She needed to intervene before the situation spiraled out of control. "Excuse me," she called out, walking toward them with the calm authority she had used countless times in military situations. "I am Ms. Mitchell, one of the teachers here. Can I help you with something?" The drunk man turned toward her, and Sarah could see that he was not just intoxicated, he was in a rage that suggested this situation had been building for some time. "Yeah, you can help me," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "You can tell this punk to get out of my way so I can talk to my daughter." Sarah glanced toward the office and saw that Dr. Williams had moved the young woman away from the door and was probably calling for help on her cell phone. Good, backup would be arriving soon. "I understand you want to speak with your daughter," Sarah said calmly, "but this is not the appropriate place or time for that conversation. The school is closed, and you are trespassing on school property." The man laughed harshly. "Trespassing? Lady, I pay taxes that fund this place. I have every right to be here." "Actually, you do not," Sarah replied, her voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel. "School property is not public property, and you do not have permission to be here after hours. I need you to leave immediately." Sarah could see Marcus watching her carefully, probably wondering how she would handle the situation without escalating it to violence. This was his chance to see how someone with training and experience dealt with aggressive people without resorting to the tactics he had used at the convenience store. The man studied Sarah with bloodshot eyes, clearly trying to decide whether she represented a threat or just another obstacle to push through. "You know what, lady? I do not think I am going anywhere until I get what I came for." He took a step toward Sarah, close enough that she could smell the alcohol on his breath mixed with something else, probably methamphetamine or cocaine, based on his dilated pupils and erratic behavior. Sarah felt her combat training kick in automatically. She shifted her weight to her back foot, ready to move quickly in any direction. Her hands remained relaxed at her sides, but her fingers positioned themselves for defensive action if necessary. "Sir, I understand you are upset, but threatening school staff is a felony. If you leave now, we can forget this ever happened. If you stay, the police will arrest you, and your daughter will watch you get handcuffed and taken away. Is that really what you want?" For a moment, Sarah thought her words had gotten through to him. The man hesitated, his expression showing a flicker of uncertainty. Then, his daughter's voice came from behind the office door. "Please, Dad, just go home. I will call you tomorrow, I promise." The sound of his daughter's voice seemed to enrage the man rather than calm him. "You see," he screamed, wheeling back toward the office. "She is scared of me because of whatever lies you people have been filling her head with." Before anyone could react, he lunged toward the office door, clearly intending to force his way inside. Marcus moved to intercept him, but the man was bigger and more experienced in physical confrontations than the teenagers Marcus had been dealing with previously. Sarah saw the collision coming and made a split-second decision that would change everything. As the man shoved Marcus aside and reached for the office door handle, Sarah moved with the speed and precision that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of combat training. In one fluid motion, she stepped forward, grabbed the man's extended arm, and used his own momentum to spin him away from the door and slam him face-first against the hallway wall. The impact was loud enough to echo through the empty building, and the man grunted in pain and surprise as Sarah twisted his arm behind his back in a restraint hold that immobilized him completely. "Do not move," she said quietly, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who had subdued armed enemies in life-or-death situations. "If you struggle, I will dislocate your shoulder." The man tried to push back against the wall, probably intending to overpower her through brute strength, but Sarah applied pressure to his twisted arm in a way that sent shooting pain through his shoulder and elbow. "I said do not move," she repeated, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. The entire sequence had taken less than 5 seconds. Marcus stood frozen in the hallway, staring at Sarah in complete amazement. The drunk man who had seemed so intimidating moments earlier was now pinned helplessly against the wall by a substitute teacher who looked like she could handle him all day without breaking a sweat. "Marcus," Sarah said calmly, not taking her eyes off the man she was restraining,
please check on Dr. Williams and make sure she is called for police backup." Marcus shook himself out of his stupor and moved toward the office.
"Dr. Williams, are you okay? Did you call the police?"
"They are on their way," came Dr. Williams's voice from behind the door.
"Should be here in less than 5 minutes."
Sarah nodded, maintaining her hold on the increasingly docile drunk. The reality of his situation seemed to be penetrating his intoxicated brain, and he had stopped struggling against her restraint. "What are you?" he asked, his voice muffled against the wall. "I am someone who used to do this for a living," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. Marcus approached slowly, his expression showing a mixture of awe and confusion.
"Ms. Mitchell, where did you learn to do that?"
Sarah glanced at him briefly before returning her attention to her captive.
12 years of military training, Marcus. This is what it looks like when you know how to handle violence properly."
The distinction was not lost on Marcus. Sarah had neutralized a threat quickly and efficiently, using exactly the amount of force necessary to control the situation without causing serious injury. She had not continued to apply force once the threat was contained, and she had not let anger or adrenaline drive her actions. "The difference," Sarah continued, speaking as much to Marcus as to anyone, "is knowing when to use force, how much force to use, and when to stop using force." This man was a threat to Dr. Williams and his daughter.
"Once he is no longer a threat, my job is to keep him safe until the police arrive."
Marcus nodded slowly, and Sarah could see understanding dawning in his eyes. This was the lesson he had needed to learn, not that violence was never justified, but that there were rules and limits that separated protection from assault. The sound of sirens announced the arrival of the police, and, within minutes, the hallway filled with officers taking statements and preparing to arrest the drunk man. Sarah released her hold and stepped back, allowing the professionals to take over. As the man was being handcuffed, he looked back at Sarah with a mixture of resentment and grudging respect.
"You military?"
"Former Navy," Sarah replied simply.
The man nodded as if that explained everything. "Should have said so from the beginning.
Would have saved us both some trouble." As the police led him away, Dr. Williams emerged from the office with the young woman, who was clearly shaken but unharmed. They thanked Sarah repeatedly for her intervention, and Dr. Williams promised to provide a full report to the administration about her actions. When everyone else had left and the building was quiet again, Sarah found herself alone in the hallway with Marcus. They stood in silence for several long moments, both processing what had just happened. "That was incredible," Marcus finally said. "I mean, that guy had to outweigh you by 80 pounds, and you handled him like he was nothing."
Sarah smiled slightly.
"Training and technique, Marcus. Size and strength matter, but they are not the most important factors in a physical confrontation.
Knowing what you are doing and staying calm under pressure matter more."
Marcus studied her with new respect.
"Is that what you meant when you said I needed to learn the difference between protection and revenge?" "Partly.
But there is more to it than just technique.
The most important difference is in your mindset when you act."
When I restrained that man, I was thinking about stopping a threat and keeping everyone safe. When you kept hitting that man at the convenience store, you were thinking about punishing him for threatening someone you cared about."
Marcus nodded thoughtfully.
The result might look the same, but the intention is different.
Exactly.
And the intention determines when you stop. I stopped as soon as the threat was neutralized because my goal was protection. You kept going because your goal became punishment. They walked slowly toward the parking lot, both lost in thought about the events of the afternoon and what they meant for Marcus's ongoing development. "Ms. Mitchell," Marcus said as they reached her car, "I know I have not always been easy to work with, and I know I said some terrible things to you last week. But I want you to know that everything you have taught me, about honor, about responsibility, about what it means to be strong, I have been listening to all of it." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes at the sincerity in his voice.
"I know you have, Marcus.
And I want you to know that I have never stopped believing in the man you can become." Marcus was quiet for a long moment before speaking again. "When I saw that guy threatening Dr. Williams and that girl, my first instinct was to hurt him. Not just stop him, but hurt him for scaring them. It was exactly like what happened at the store. But, you did not hurt him, Sarah pointed out. You positioned yourself defensively and tried to de-escalate the situation. That is growth, Marcus. Only because I kept hearing your voice in my head, telling me that being strong meant knowing when not to use violence. Marcus smiled slightly. And, because I knew that if I messed up again, I would lose the only teacher who ever really believed in me. Sarah reached out and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. You are never going to lose that, Marcus. Even when you make mistakes, even when you disappoint me or yourself, I am still going to believe that you are capable of extraordinary things. That is what teachers do. We see who our students can become, not just who they are right now. Marcus nodded, and Sarah could see that he was fighting back tears. My dad would have liked you, he said quietly. He always said that the best leaders were the ones who made you want to be better than you thought you could be. Your father raised an exceptional young man, Sarah replied. He would be proud of the progress you have made and the man you are becoming. As they parted ways in the parking lot, Sarah reflected on the unexpected turn her life had taken. 6 months earlier, she had been a lost veteran struggling to find purpose in civilian life. Now she was a teacher who had helped save a troubled young man from destroying his future and had used her military skills to protect innocent people from a genuine threat. For the first time since her discharge from the Navy, Sarah felt like she had found her mission again. Not in some foreign country fighting an enemy she barely understood, but in a classroom in her own community, helping young people navigate the challenges of growing up in a complicated world. And, as she drove home that evening, Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the best of her service was still ahead of her. Marcus Thompson returned to school the following Monday a changed young man. The angry, intimidating teenager who had entered Sarah's classroom 4 months earlier was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength came from discipline, wisdom, and the courage to do the right thing even when it was difficult. He graduated from Lincoln High School with honors, earned a scholarship to study social work at the State University, and went on to become a counselor specializing in helping military families deal with trauma and loss. He never forgot the teacher who saw past his anger to the potential underneath, and he made sure that every young person he worked with knew that their worst moment did not have to define their future. Sarah Mitchell continued teaching at Lincoln High School for the next 15 years, becoming known as the teacher who could reach even the most difficult students. She never again had to use her military training in a physical confrontation, but the lessons she had learned about leadership, courage, and the importance of never giving up on people served her well in every interaction with her students. And, sometimes, when she encountered a young person struggling with anger and pain that seemed too big to handle, she would tell them the story of a brave soldier named David Thompson who died protecting others, and his son Marcus, who learned that the best way to honor his father's memory was not through violence, but through service to others. It was, she always said, a lesson worth fighting for.